Tonight, we begin with a military strike that Pentagon officials had feared, Israeli defense analysts had warned about, and US naval commanders had quietly prepared for. A strike that unfolded not over days, not over weeks, but in minutes. Minutes that left 2 Israeli warships damaged in the Red Sea. Minutes that triggered emergency protocols across 3 continents. Minutes that changed the entire calculus of this conflict. What Iran did today crossed a line that Washington and Jerusalem had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, Israel did not hesitate. They responded with precision, with speed, and with overwhelming force. For weeks now, there had been signals. Not official statements, not diplomatic warnings, just signals that Iran was preparing something unprecedented. Iran has been aggressive, yes. But they have been calculated in their aggression. Their moves have followed a certain rhythm, a predictability, almost a pattern. But what set off alarm bells in Tel Aviv and Washington this week was that the pattern went silent. Intelligence analysts who monitor Iranian naval activity know the indicators, the communications chatter, the vessel repositioning, the missile battery activations, the sudden absence of routine patrols. All of that went quiet. And whenever Iran goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. Early this morning, US Central Command detected what they described as unusual Iranian naval positioning, including anti-ship missile systems that had not been activated in over 18 months. These are the kinds of weapon systems that Iran only deploys when they are signalling something very specific: escalation, provocation, or preparation for direct confrontation. Western intelligence agencies didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all 3 at once. But what they did know was that Iran was changing its military posture. And when a regional power like Iran shifts posture without explanation, even by a fraction of a degree, every intelligence agency in the region pays attention. The warning issued by the Pentagon tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Official after briefing described Iran's strike as unprecedented, deliberate, and perhaps most importantly, potentially catastrophic for regional stability. But intimidation only works if the target hesitates. Israel did not. In fact, their response today was among the most decisive we've seen in modern Middle Eastern conflict. Here's what we know. Within 90 minutes of the strike on their warships, Israel scrambled F-35 Ayadir stealth fighters. These weren't routine air patrols. These were precision strike packages. Weapon systems that Israel only deploys when they're preparing to eliminate a threat entirely. Tonight, the Israeli Defense Forces confirmed that Israel launched retaliatory strikes on Iranian naval positions along the Yemeni coast, including missile batteries that had recently been repositioned for what analysts believe was specifically targeting Israeli vessels. Israel struck before Iran could reload and fire again. They hit coastal radar installations, they hit command and control centres, they hit supply depots that were likely preparing to sustain the attack. In other words, Israel targeted the infrastructure behind the attack, the logistics chain that would have made it operational. This is what made Washington's warning so urgent. Iran's strike wasn't just symbolic, it was actionable. It represented the kind of move that could destabilise the entire region if left unchecked. And Israel, understanding that fully, responded with force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't strike civilian areas. They didn't target population centres. They hit military infrastructure. They hit the weapons that hit them. And here's where the story becomes even more alarming. US. But intelligence officials now believe that Iran's latest move was designed to test the resolve of the US-Israel alliance after months of regional tension. Iran wanted to see whether Israel would show hesitation, but instead the opposite happened. Israel didn't hesitate. They coordinated a response that was so swift, so devastating that even Tehran noticed you don't get Iran's attention easily. But today, Israel did. Defense analysts speaking with Western media under anonymity described Iran's shift as strategic probing, a way to expose weaknesses in the alliance. But Israel proved today that they remain both capable and willing. Their strikes were not only immediate, they were calibrated so precisely that Iranian forces had no time to relocate assets. Well, that element matters because it shows Israeli intelligence penetration of Iranian operations. It shows that Israel is not merely reacting, they are anticipating. As reports continued coming in throughout the evening, we learned more about the scale of Israel's response. The Israeli Air Force carried out precision strikes on Iranian coastal positions, forcing immediate withdrawal of remaining Iranian vessels. Israeli naval forces targeted supply ships that had been repositioned in the last 48 hours. Israeli intelligence units operating from undisclosed locations reportedly disrupted communications networks used by Iran to coordinate the attack. This wasn't just retaliation. This wasn't just defence. This was strategic dominance. This was deterrence. And deterrence is the one thing Iran has struggled to overcome since the beginning of this conflict. For every advance they have made, Israel has countered with something that undermines their position entirely. Remember, Iran thought Israel would be distracted by domestic politics. They thought the international community would hesitate to act. They thought Washington would counsel restraint over action. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Israel responded within hours. The US immediately backed its ally with military assets. Iran's gamble has backfired spectacularly. What makes this moment so significant and so dangerous is that Iran's latest move happened at a time when Supreme Leader Khamenei is under immense domestic pressure. Hardliners want escalation. Moderates want de-escalation. The Revolutionary Guard wants to prove their relevance. Economic advisors want to avoid further sanctions. Khamenei is balancing these demands while managing a struggling economy. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. The Pentagon statement, now distributed to all major news outlets, was designed to signal that Washington is not willing to allow Iran to threaten international shipping lanes. Pentagon officials said plainly that Iran's strike on Israeli warships was inconsistent with international maritime law. That is diplomatic language for this was an act of war. You don't usually hear that tone from Washington unless something serious is at stake. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu addressed the nation in a defiant, resolute speech tonight. He said, "We will not be intimidated by those who seek our destruction." He said, "Those who attack Israel will pay a heavy price." And he said, "Our response tonight is only the beginning if aggression continues." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a nation that understands just how high the stakes have become. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Iran's latest move wasn't isolated, along with the strike on Israeli warships. Hezbollah in Lebanon also increased rocket fire toward northern Israel. Houthi rebels in Yemen launched drones toward Israeli territory. Iranian cyber units increased attacks targeting Israeli infrastructure. All of this happened within the same 24 hours. When Iran moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. Regional analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Iran is preparing for a broader regional war. Another is that Iran is attempting to force international mediation on their terms. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Iran is attempting to establish permanent naval dominance in the Red Sea. But today, Israel took that card off the table. They didn't wait for diplomatic channels. They didn't issue warnings first. They didn't consult for days. They acted immediately and decisively. What we're watching now is a test of deterrence. Iran wants to see whether the alliance will crack under pressure. Israel wants to show that their red lines are absolute. Washington wants to prevent a regional war. And European allies want to prevent disruption of global shipping lanes. Tonight, we've heard from Pentagon officials who are now tracking Iranian vessel movements across the region. They say Iranian naval forces are repositioning away from Israeli strike range. They say additional US carrier groups are being deployed to the region. And they say Iran's decision to strike the warships is likely part of a larger campaign intended to test Western resolve. But Israel is not backing down. In fact, Israel is preparing for any contingency. Their response today, immediate, precise and devastating, sent a message to Tehran that aggression will be met with overwhelming force. And it sent a message to Washington that the alliance remains unshakable. As the night goes on, and we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Iran hoped to achieve. But what we do know is that Washington's warning was timely. It demonstrated resolve. It preserved deterrence. And it sent an unmistakable message. And what happens next will depend on what Iran does in the next 72 hours. If they escalate further, this moment will be remembered as a miscalculation with catastrophic consequences. If they back down, Israel and Washington have already shown they are prepared. They have shown they are ready to respond. And tonight, for the first time in months, Iran appears to be reconsidering. Tehran is quiet, too quiet. And when Iran is quiet, it means they are calculating. It means they are choosing their next move carefully, because tonight, Iran learned something they have learned many times before. Israel will not hesitate. Washington stands behind its allies and the Red Sea is not theirs to control. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. Israel has responded with overwhelming force. The alliance between Washington and Jerusalem remains ironclad. And Iran's gamble has not paid off. And we will be here watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.